Well, not that he could ever really be great, you understand.
Oh, is that so? And in the name of St. Bridget, why not?
Well, all of the really great cornet players were Irish.
You shouldn't hang me on a hook. My father hung me on a hook once. Once.
A, B, C. A always B, B, C closing. Always be closing. Always be closing.
Fire! Fire!
Said it every time we use this clip, but if you're new to the show, I'll say it again and it'll be fresh for you. Starting the show off with a bang. How are ya? Big bang, boom. Mark here, the Cinemaniac. You watching this program, unless you think this is Farm Club, you probably like flicks like I like flicks, thus making us together the titular Cinemaniacs. We have a relatively short list this week. I did see a lot of movies this weekend, and if we have time, we probably will. I'll talk about the other things that I saw, but I only saw one new release in the theater. A new release that is strangely, apparently, dividing critics and audiences and people I know who saw the movie. We'll go over here to our friend Camera 2 to talk about it, shall we? Thank you for joining me in Camera 2. Brought to you by nobody in particular. Brought to you by the guy who set it up. Thank you. This is a new film, a new take on an age-old fairy tale. This is the tale, don't roll the clip, this is the tale of that always has heretofore been known as Hansel and Gretel. Two little kids, they walk off into the woods and they come across a gingerbread house and inside is a witch and she wants to eat the kids. That's terrible. This is a new film that's a new spin on that legend, that fairy tale, dark take on that tale, and a pretty dark tale when you think about it. Despite the whole all the free candy in a house you can eat, the whole burning the kids alive thing kind of makes that fairy tale not terribly kid-friendly. So we have a tale of a young girl and her younger brother who are left to fend for themselves in the wilderness, and they're off to find the woodsman camp who will take these two orphans in and train them in the ways of woodness. And wouldn't you know it, they come across an evil witch instead. This is the tale this time of Gretel and Hansel. So I saw that trailer, as you did if you're watching this on TV. If you're watching this on YouTube, do a little search for Gretel and Hansel trailer 2020 and you'll be able to see what I just had to cut out. This is, as they say, a dark tale on the grim fairy tale, as it says in the tagline. This is art house horror, I would say. I saw this in a multiplex. I saw this at a movie tavern, which is a pretty cool theater chain in Pennsylvania and elsewhere in the country. And pretty mixed audience in terms of, you know, it was mostly adults. Almost entirely adults, I would say. In terms of people my age or older. To me, an adult is somebody older than me, so people had a couple decades on me in that theater. PG-13, which surprised me. Just watch. See, ratings don't matter to me anymore because I don't have to show an ID to get into anything. So part of the game that I play when I'm watching a film is, I wonder what that was rated. And watching this, I would have presumed it was rated R for how dark and grim and how creepy the tone was and some moments of gruesomeness. But it turns out this was PG-13. So anyway, very much an art house film, very much artistically done. I say art house in terms of, you know, a lot more care was put into the quality of the film, but also it deals with themes in such a way that isn't sort of your typical mainstream kind of bubblegum fast food type of way. Not that there's anything wrong with bubblegum or fast food, but you know. So you have, let me look at her name because I'm just so good with these things. Sophia Lillis, Sophia, our old friend Sophia from the It films, the younger kid It portion of the It films. She's Gretel. Alice Krieg, never pronounced her name aloud, only ever read it, is the witch, and Hansel is just a young boy. So you have Gretel looking after Hansel. Their parents are not in the picture anymore. They're left to fend for themselves out in the harsh wilderness landscape of the woods, and they are sort of pointed in the direction of go this way and you'll be taken in by this encampment that are logging people. and you should be okay. And they lose their way, as the story goes, and they find the Wicked Witch, or the witch's house. And it is just stone cold creepy. It's weird, it's creepy, it's disturbing at times. I see a lot of horror movies and very few give me the creeps anymore because I see the same kind of thing over and over again. And a lot of what is presented as scary in films now just doesn't work for me. This did work for me in a really nice and cool way. There are some minor things that I didn't love about the film, but overall I thought the performances were very good. It was really well shot, some really interesting imagery, some very creepy imagery and moments. The overall tone was appropriately grim and also unsettling. Like, it's fairly slow for a good section of the film when they get to the witch's house, which is very interestingly designed and not made out of gingerbread, unless it was really burned and moldy gingerbread. No sugar plums in sight. They get to the witch's house, and it's a lot of dialogue back and forth between this kindly maybe old lady and Gretel and Hansel and all this other stuff. And just the tone is so grim. You know that something's not right, and you don't know exactly what. And because this film is kind of going about things in a different way, you're not 100% that you know where the story is going to go like you normally would. And you know that this is an hour and a half or more, so it's not just they get there and they push her in the oven. Krieg, very good. Very unsettling and creepy as the witch. She's been in films, she goes back to, as far as horror films, back to Ghost Story in, was it 1981, I believe, Sleepwalkers, which I think is a terrible film, but some people like. Funny to laugh at, I guess, maybe. And then lots of other classier stuff than that. And Gretel and Hansel. So we saw it over the weekend. We liked it a lot. I looked online. Friends really liked it a lot. And then apparently critics and all of this, aggregate ratings of audience members and all this kind of stuff is rating the film only at like 50% or so. And I don't get that, because this is far better than a lot of what I've seen, certainly horror-wise. And just in terms of just movies I've gone to see in the theater in a while. This is one I would highly recommend seeing in a theater on the big screen, because the visuals are so well done, because the creepy score and surround sound are so well done. It reminded me of Jodorowsky a little bit, which was surprising to me. It reminded me of The Witch, or The Vavitch, which I really didn't like. I like this a lot better than The Witch. It reminded me a lot of that kind of more current trend of rural horror or old-timey out-in-the-woods horror, that kind of thing. So, but it is also kind of classy. It's not overtly gory. There are moments of gruesomeness, but it's just more the tone is really unsettling the whole time. So that is out in theaters now. I'm going to presume that it's probably not going to be in theaters terribly long. It looks like there's only one major release next week, but I think you get another week or two of major releases, and this is the kind of film where if it doesn't perform really well, it's probably going to scoot. And it would be a shame to only ever see this on video, because I had a really good time in a dark theater with this, and you might too. So that's all I have to talk about in the theater. I did see 3 other movies in the theater yesterday, but they're not new movies, so we're going to save that to the end of the show, and I'll just jibber jabber for however much time I have left about that experience, because in addition to films, it was an experience. So now we move on to home video. This is all stuff that is out today or tomorrow, or already on the home video platform, service, channels, streaming, clickable, disc-based blipvert of your choice. First up is a film that is a sequel to one of the most famous and iconic and most beloved by most people horror films of all time. So back in 1980, Stanley Kubrick did a film adaptation of Stephen King's novel, The Shining. And Stephen King famously hated it, thought it was terrible. A lot of people who really loved the book didn't like The Shining. All I know is that I saw The Shining and it freaked me out. And every time I watch The Shining, it is creepy as hell. I think it's one of the most effective horror films there is. The tone is amazing. It's just, it's The Shining. Come on. So, years later, Stephen King wrote a sequel to The Shining featuring the story of young Danny Torrance all grows up and what becomes of him and the powers that he exhibits in that book, the original book. And now Hollywood has seen fit to make a film adaptation of this. This is Ewan McGregor as young Danny Torrance, all grown up and still possessing that little shimmery nature in Dr. Sleep. Sorry about that. Drinking a little monkey water. So, I never read the book of Dr. Sleep. I never read the book of The Shining. I'm a movie guy. What can I say? I do like to read. I do know how to read, in case you were wondering. But I don't read fiction as often as I would like to. So, I'm only basing my opinion on the film. I've heard people say the Dr. Sleep book was very good. I didn't really care for the Dr. Sleep movie very much. Part of it was going in with a little bit of a beef. Part of it, to me, felt like this movie was an excuse for somebody to remake a lot of The Shining. Now, this doesn't necessarily restage that movie. The story of Dr. Sleep is not the same as The Shining, but you do go back into that movie a good amount. You do get recreations of scenes with Jack Torrance, who was played by Jack Nicholson in the original, but understandably isn't played by Jack Nicholson in this movie. So you get somebody else, and you know The Shining so well, and it's so iconic, and the imagery is so iconic. When suddenly you're seeing other people playing those characters, it just doesn't seem right. Now, you see these things that people have done online, some people with talent and the right software where they can take a celebrity's face and put it over the face of somebody in a classic movie, and suddenly you've got Jim Carrey in The Shining or Arnold Schwarzenegger in Dirty Harry, and it looks pretty damn good. You wish that they somehow would have paid Nicholson enough money to allow that technology to be used in this movie so that they would connect the two together better. Maybe that's just me being hung up on The Shining. So yes, if you're a big fan of The Shining and you want to see more of The Shining in some form that isn't the original movie, you do get glimpses of that in this. You get recreations of some moments from that film, maybe from a different angle. You get a little bit more of what happened at the Overlook Hotel from Danny's point of view as an adult looking back on that. But to me, that just felt, I don't know, it felt like a cheat, like it was manipulating my emotions to give this movie goodwill because The Shining is so good and I like it. And again, maybe I'm just crazy. So the storyline basically is you have Danny Torrance as like an alcoholic, drug addict, not doing so well in his life guy who's still, he's messed up from what happened to him as a kid, understandably. And he basically finds that he is connected with other kids or people around the world who have The Shining, that ability, and something bad is coming. And that something bad is, let me see if I can see her name here, Rebecca Ferguson, as this weird hippie hat-wearing girl who sits on top of Winnebagos and does enchantments, and her weird band of gypsy sorcerers or something who are trying to bring about the end of the world or kill all the kids, and they're trying to do something bad, I don't know. It all seemed really silly to me. It seemed very cheesy and very silly to me. I really couldn't get into it. I think it's well made for the most part, but I didn't care. I didn't care at all. Like maybe the book was a lot better, but the movie to me just seemed silly and cheesy, and you have good actors in it, but I didn't care. Now, I am told that on Netflix, or maybe not Netflix, somewhere streaming right now, you can pay, and you can see a much longer version of this movie. I can't tell you how many times I think a longer version of a movie makes it any better. I think flaws in films are pretty inherent throughout the movie. So when somebody says, oh, it's got that extra 15 seconds, maybe. If you like it, it's more to like. I loved Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and I'm really excited about a longer version of that someday because it puts me in that world a little bit longer, and I get to spend a little bit more time with those characters. So if you like Dr. Sleep, maybe this extended version is exactly that. Maybe it's just like, oh, baby, give me more of Ewan McGregor making things move with his mind. I don't know. I didn't really care for Dr. Sleep, and sue me. Now, speaking of films, I don't have too many good transitions in me today. This is a film for grown-ups, which is nice to see once in a while. I think you would say probably Dr. Sleep and Gretel and Hansel pretty much. Yeah, pretty much everything we're talking about this week is a movie for grown-ups, so who am I to judge? We have a film starring Mr. Ian McKellen as a British man, as he is, so he's a role that he was born to play, as a man who is working the grift, working the graft against Helen Mirren, who is a wealthy, or let's say comfortable widower, and widow? She's a comfortable widow financially, and Ian McKellen is a man who's looking to see what he can do to maybe get a little taste of that money by playing on her good graces and her confidence because he is the good liar. So this is a thriller of sorts, a drama. As I said before the clip, if you've just joined us already in progress, you have Ian McKellen as a confidence man, a con artist, who decides to target Helen Mirren, who is a financially comfortable widow, and he wants to basically have her fall in love with him as, this lonely old man, and basically sign over half her fortune to him so that he can, piss off to Buenos Aires or something with her money. So it's this film where you're slowly watching how he plays that game with her, how he wins her over, how she has a young grandson who's living with her and he's a little suspicious. And it's the whole, I wouldn't even say cat and mouse. It's this whole game of trying to, how a con man works and financially basically takes over somebody's, finances and then makes off with it. And then there's a twist. Now, obviously, I'm not going to tell you what the twist is, and for some strange reason, this trailer didn't, because these days, trailers tend to tell you every little thing that happens in a movie up until, what the end credits look like. This film didn't do that, and I was really surprised. The film becomes a different kind of movie at some point when there's the twist. I mean, like, it doesn't go from this drama to a Western or to a science fiction movie, but the narrative path is going in one direction that you're following, and then all of a sudden it goes, woo! And you're like, whoa, hey, this is something entirely different. And I don't know if that's entirely successful that it does that. I think in my own heart, I would have probably preferred that it just went on the track to its conclusion that you think it's going to go on, but I have to give it a lot of credit for surprising me, because so few films do. Most movies you sit down, and if there's a bad guy that shows up later in the film, you spot him in the first 20 minutes, and it's a lot of the same stories over and over again, and this was not. This was a huge surprise. So it's definitely an intelligent movie. It deals with, loneliness and the aged and looking for someone to spend the rest of your time with, and, broken people coming together, a couple of broken parts coming together to form a whole. And then I'm not even going to talk about what that other part is about, because I don't want to ruin anything. You will never see, unless you read anything about the film, you will never see the twist coming. You'll know that there is a twist because maybe people or I have mentioned it, but you will never guess where this movie goes. I thought The Good Liar was quite good, and certainly a nice film to watch for grown-ups. It might not leave you smiling and clicking your heels at the end of it. I would, as I always say, maybe have a comedy queued up next after this one. But it was quite good. And come on, it's Helen Mirren and Ian McKellen. They're going to be good, even if the film drops the ball a little bit. So, speaking of balls dropping, this film is not about that at all. This is a revenge movie. This is a brutal tale of frontier vengeance. This is a film about a young indentured servant, a young woman who, with her husband and family, basically sold themselves into, if you want to be extreme, you can say slavery, and if you want to be less extreme, you can say servitude, in order to get passage from, I believe it was England to Australia in the early days of Australia. And things go very, very bad for her. And then she decides to take revenge with her own two hands on the people who perpetrated it in The Nightingale. A revenge film, an art house film, historical, takes place, as I say, in the early days of Australia, when Australia was very much still a wilderness, and there were still, colonial soldiers and all kinds of things going on. It took me a little while when I was watching this it may say at the beginning the time and place where this takes place, but it took me a little bit to orient myself. Was this America? Was this England? Was it Australia? It's Australia. And so what I always say about revenge movies, some people watch revenge movies and they are completely traumatized and horrified by the inciting incident. There's always an incident in a revenge movie that sets off the person on that path to get back at the people who did it upon them or their family or their friends or whatever. That incident has to be really awful, because it needs to make the audience want to see the hero or heroine just really dismantle the bad people. And if you're like me and some people I've spoken with recently, when you watch a revenge movie, it's awful to say, but you really want it to be like a football team that does something really bad, because you want to see the hero or heroine work their way through a lot of people. You don't want to see just like 3 people get their comeuppance. You want to see it be like a dozen or 10. So this film, the incident that in question, is really brutal. It is really hard to watch. It's really, really awful. I don't know how I feel about the whole trigger warning thing so much, but when I was watching this in the theater, I thought, if somebody was a victim of sexual violence at some point in their life, they might want to know what this movie contains, because it was very hard to watch. Basically, this young woman and her husband and young child, are assaulted by these evil drunken soldiers, and what they do to all of the people in that family is horrifying. It's really hard to watch and get past in the movie, but it does put that in your gut that, wow, these guys need to pay. So the film is this woman getting up on her own 2 feet somehow after all that happens and setting off to find these guys and take them out. And she hires a native Aboriginal, native to Australia, I should say, they're original native people, to be her guide, to take her through the rugged wilderness and mountains to find these people and take care of them. And so it's two, you want to say second-class citizens in the time period in which the film takes place, but it's even lower than second-class citizen because she's a woman who's, she's on a lower rung as it is with that society, but she's also the indentured servant, so she's even lower to everybody. And the Aboriginal person who is viewed by everybody as, not inhuman and some cheap labor that you hire and treat poorly. So these two people are going up against, the British soldiers. I believe they're British, they might be Australian. And it's rugged and it's art house, so it feels very authentic and it's very, gray skies and muddy roads through the woods and everything like that. And pretty gruesome revenge at times. It ain't pretty. It ain't a pretty flick. It's sort of like a extremely classy I Spit in Your Grave. And you have people who you recognize in it. Now, the names don't mean much to me, but Ailing Franciosi from, if she's watching, I'm sorry I mangled that name, from Game of Thrones. You have Sam Claflin, or as I would like to say, Claflin, who was in one or more of the Hunger Games films and Pirates of the Caribbean. Reminded me of Nicholas Hoult quite a bit, actually. And what's his name? Damon Harriman, who played Charles Manson in both Mindhunter and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and also was on Justified for quite a while. They're faces you'd recognize, if not names. So Nightingale, very good. Not one for the whole family, I would say. So that's all I saw that is on my list for today. I'm going to take a drink. Actually, if we could, this is not on our schedule, but if we could cut to some chimp boxing for a moment while I drink a little monkey water, that will cover up the disgusting nature of me drinking. Thank you. Thank you. I hope that means to you as much as it means to me. So, my lady and I took a trip this weekend to Phoenixville, Pennsylvania. Phoenixville, Pennsylvania, a very nice little town. Notable to me because in Phoenixville is the Colonial Theater. Where I'm sitting right now also has a Colonial Theater. This is a different one. The Colonial Theater in Phoenixville, Pennsylvania, an old single-screen movie theater, mostly untouched by time. And it's notable to me because there's a scene from the late 50s film The Blob set in that theater. If you've ever seen the original Blob, there's a scene in the movie theater and the Blob gets into the projection room and it takes over the projectionist and then it oozes through one of the portholes in the projection booth into the balcony and everybody runs screaming out of the theater. That theater has embraced that little piece of history. They have something called Blobfest every year where they show 50s sci-fi movies and they do costume contests and prize giveaways and they close off the street and have a party and they do a recreation of the Run Out where everybody runs screaming out of the theater every year, a little parade. It's pretty cool. I've always wanted to go, but I'm always at the Mahoning Drive-In Theater in Laheyton, Pennsylvania, doing my thing there, so I never can get away to do Blobfest. I really need to sometime because it looks cool. So I've wanted to go to the Colonial Theater forever. This Sunday, this would be yesterday from when we're taping, there's a group there that puts on regular retro horror screenings. They show really good stuff. The theater does a really interesting mix of art house films and retro films and cult horror and fun stuff. They have John Waters coming pretty soon, presenting a couple of his films. They're showing Chopping Mall very soon. I know a couple other places they're showing Chopping Mall pretty soon. And they show these horror things all the time. So they did this thing called the Horror Bowl to counter-program against the Super Bowl for people like me who don't give a about the Super Bowl or sports in general. They decided to program what has become known as the John Carpenter Apocalypse Trilogy. He never intended these movies to be connected, but a lot of people have seen there are these three movies where it's pretty much the end of the world as the film goes on. So it was, the order we saw them in was Prince of Darkness from 1987, In the Mouth of Madness from, I want to say 93, early 90s, and The Thing from 1982. Undeniable classic, The Thing. So I went because I wanted to go. I've always wanted to go to that theater, and it was something to do because I've never really liked Prince of Darkness or In the Mouth of Madness. The Thing is undeniable. The Thing is just great. The Thing is one of those films that plays so often, everywhere, all the time, that I look at somebody showing The Thing and I'm like, really? The Thing again? How original. And then you watch it and you're like, oh yeah, that's why, because it's great. It's like Jaws. I get a bug in my bonnet because everybody shows Jaws every 2 weeks in a theater somewhere and it's always everywhere. And then I watch Jaws and I go, oh yeah, because it's perfect. That's why everybody shows it. So we went to the theater and it was amazing. They have a big, huge balcony, so you can go into that balcony that was on film back in the late 50s, and they have a plaque on the wall that commemorates, in 1958 the Blob came through this porthole, and they have this bronze like hunk of blob basically that recreates that you can go up to, and it says rub the blob for good luck. So I did. I rub any blob I can get my hands on, I'll rub. And the balcony is open, it's huge. The theater is a nice big single screen theater with a stage. It's gorgeous in there. It was wonderful. And the group that puts it on, they do raffles and giveaways and all kinds of stuff. And it was a really good time. Now, what has happened to this theater, when I was looking at their listings, I was a little nervous because I saw they listed 3 theaters or 2 screens. And I was like, oh, did they bust it up? Because so many theaters over time, needing to maximize how much turnover and profit they could get, they would take what was a single screen with a balcony and they would turn the balcony, they would wall off the balcony and turn that into a theater, or they would split the big screen up into multiple little screens. And it always disgusts me because there are so few untouched single screen theaters left in this country. Every time one of them gets split up, it's just like, oh, smaller is not the way to go. So apparently what they did with the Colonial in Phoenixville is they took the building next door, which looks like it might have been a bank. I don't know, it was gigantic, high ceiling. They knocked down a wall so that the two are connected. So from the lobby, original lobby of the Colonial Theater, you go to the right and there's this gigantic lobby that has a staircase to the balcony, and it also has a big snack bar, a big congregation area, and places to go to 2 other theaters. So the original Colonial Theater that you step into, to my imagination, is not terribly different than it was when Steve McQueen and the gang stepped in there back in the late 50s for the Blob, and they have a nice original poster for the Blob in there too. So I went, Val and I went, and our friends were there, several friends from various places that we hang out. It was nice to see them again in the off season, Pennsylvania and New Jersey and New York people. And so why am I rambling about all this? Because, hey, I've got 21 minutes and why not? So the first film was Prince of Darkness from 1987. Prince of Darkness came for John Carpenter. It came after Big Trouble in Little China and before They Live. For my money, They Live was John Carpenter's last, for me, really good movie. After that, most of them really don't work for me. And Prince of Darkness is one that I've seen. I know it's got a big following. I know people love it. It's got a nice Scream Factory release. But every time I've watched it, it just does not click. So I thought, big screen, I'm going to give it another shot. It's been several years since I've watched this, and it still did not click for me. Basically, the story is Donald Pleasance is a priest, and he discovers in the basement of this church is this ancient cylinder with this rotating green liquid in it that I think is supposed to be the devil or evil or the son of the devil or something like that. It's not 100% clear. And he enlists the aid of a bunch of college students who are into various types of research. I don't know if it's paranormal or physics. I think it's they're physicists, to try to figure out what this thing is and how to contain it or how to defeat it. It doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. Now, maybe I don't pay enough attention. The script was credited to Martin Quatermass, which is the name of the scientist in a series of British, often written by Nigel Neal, British science fiction thrillers, the Quatermass films. There's the Quatermass Experiment and the Creeping Unknown, which this kind of has a connection to. And you had 20 Million Years to Earth and all kinds of stuff, for 5 Million Years to Earth. They're egghead sci-fi British movies that are quite good. So I think that's Prince of Darkness is Carpenter trying to do that. So it's very much a think piece. It is a lot of people sitting around talking for most of the movie. You also have Alice Cooper in this strange role as this sort of strange street person who kind of hangs around and twitches a bit and looks at this building that everybody's in. You have bugs, and you have possession, and sort of the devil maybe, and people having a dream that looks like it was shot on VHS, and Jameson Parker with a big old mustache, and the guy who played Egg Chen in Big Trouble in Little China comes back as a college professor, and you've got the Carpenter music, which is great, and it looks like a John Carpenter movie, and it has his little stingers and his jump scares, but I just thought it was terrible. Like, I was giving it a chance again, and I'm like, the dialogue is bad, and a lot of the acting is bad, and the situations are silly sometimes, and what is this about, and what is going on, and I don't get it. I don't think I'm gonna give it another shot. I think I'm done with Prince of Darkness. If you happen to like Prince of Darkness, drop me a line, movies@CheshireTV.org, or on Facebook or YouTube or whatever, and tell me what you like about it. And I don't mean that as a challenge or as something putting down somebody who does like the movie. I just don't get it. It's a movie I've tried several times, and it just does not connect with me. And sometimes years later, you'll rewatch something, and you're maybe a little older, you're a little wiser, you're a little bit more informed about the world, less of a chip on your shoulder, I don't know what, and a film will connect when it never did before. But for me, Prince of Darkness it just doesn't make sense, and it's dull, and it's silly, and I feel like it's an incredibly long ramp up to something that doesn't happen. It did not work for me. So I went into this day knowing that I didn't like 2 out of the 3 movies. And I did not reveal that to Milady until maybe the night before. I didn't want her to think I was going in with a beef or anything. I was just like, I've really never liked 2 of these movies before, so let's see what happens. So second up was In the Mouth of Madness. This was, I want to say, a comeback movie for John Carpenter, mostly because he'd been away for a while. He did They Live in '88 or '89, and then he didn't make a movie for a while. And then he came back a few years later with In the Mouth of Madness, with Sam Neill plays sort of like an insurance investigator or a PI or some sort of investigator who's hired by a publisher to find Sutter Kane, who's basically Stephen King. They name drop Stephen King, but he's a Stephen King-like, writer who writes these incredibly popular, incredibly making his audience obsessive books that are horror novels, very Lovecraftian from the looks of the covers. And this man has dropped off a chapter or 2 somewhere of his newest novel that needs to be published, and they can't find him anywhere. He's disappeared. So Sam Neill is hired and takes along with him somebody from the publisher, female from the publishing company, to go to this weird rural town in New Hampshire and find where Sutter Kane is and either bring him back or at least get the book that needs to get printed. Charlton Heston plays the publisher. Bernie Casey is in the film. You see a few faces you recognize. And it's a very Lovecraftian film. It's very, an other dimension, a weird place where these strange, rubbery-faced, deformed people live and strange things go on. And it's a movie that I originally saw probably 94, 95. My friend Tom had it on Laserdisc, and being a big Carpenter fan, I saw it that way, and it really didn't connect for me. The Mahoning Drive-In played it again a couple of years ago for one of their John Carpenter weekends, and I really didn't like it. And I'm like, wow, yeah, I think this movie isn't good. So I was expecting to have another Prince of Darkness experience yesterday where I would sit down within the Mouth of Madness and be like, yeah, this is not good. But I think I liked it more than I ever have. I got more into it. I went in obviously with very low expectations. To me, it suffers by being when it came from. That whole early to mid 90s, that 90s look where everything was kind of overlit. And I don't mean overexposed. I mean, everything just looked like super squeaky clean and super bright and candy colored. It's not candy colored though. The colors weren't candy colored and bright. It's just everything just was too, I don't know what. It's a look that I really don't like. So it had that going against it. And some of it is supposed to be serious, but to me came off as silly or funny. And the whole rubbery, deformed makeup stuff never quite works for me. Rubbery monsters with goo all over them doesn't quite work for me. But it does dip into madness at times. And some of the imagery, if you're able to suspend your disbelief and put yourself in the shoes of the characters, is really kind of disturbing. And some of it is kind of funny. I still don't think it's that great, but it did work better for me than it ever has before. It says it's supposed to take place in New Hampshire. It was shot in Ontario because at that time, most Hollywood films were shooting in either Canada or North Carolina so that they could avoid paying union wages. So In the Mouth of Madness, it's certainly very available. I believe that's also a Scream Factory release. I think Scream Factory has put out just about all the Carpenter films in pretty deluxe editions, or all the ones that are worth putting out in deluxe editions. So it looked great. There were DCP presentations of these first 2 films on screen. And again, a really good score. The theme to In the Mouth of Madness is a really good rock tune from John Carpenter that he plays live when he does live shows now. But it didn't quite work for me again. And John Carpenter is one of those directors that you love. They did some really, really great things at one point in their career. That usually it's stuff when you were young that you saw. And they keep working, and every time you go going, maybe they'll do it this time. And then you watch the movie and you go, maybe they'll do it next time. So yeah, the last film that John Carpenter has made was The Ward from several years ago. My understanding is that he's not really interested in directing films anymore, which is fine. He could have only ever made Halloween and rested on that for the rest of his life, but he didn't. He made a lot of really great movies. The third of which is one of them. So they had Prince of Darkness, if you've joined us late, In the Mouth of Madness, and then The Thing. The Thing is you can say it's a remake of The Thing from Another World. I would. You could say it's another film based on the story Who Goes There. I believe that's what it was called, the original story that the Thing movie was based on. However you want to call it. It was done in 1982. It was apparently not much of a success in 82. What Carpenter always says is that it opened the same week as E.T. and everybody wanted the cuddly alien, not the alien that would rip your guts out. So the Thing kind of came and went, but it's always been respected by horror fans, and it has only grown and grown and grown, much like The Blob over the years, where more and more people are into The Thing and love it. So The Thing is a story of an outpost, a U.S. scientific outpost in Antarctica, and one day a cute little husky dog comes running up to them. Little do the people in the encampment know that inside that husky dog is an alien that wants to kill them all. This alien basically gets inside people somehow through their blood or through something even more gruesome than that, and replicates what these people look like and can walk and talk and walk around like a normal person, but inside is this horrible thing. It's a lot like the movie Alien, the Ridley Scott movie Alien. You can walk around with that little chest burster and you don't know it until it decides to pop up and say hello. So you have Kurt Russell, carryover, who had starred with, who had acted for John Carpenter the year before in Escape from New York. And you have Wilford Brimley and T.K. Carter and Donald Moffat and probably more famous names, Keith David, Richard Dysart, a lot of names you might not know, but faces that if you watched TV in the 80s, you know most of these people. And everybody has their job in the outpost, and one by one they start realizing something is very wrong here. Fire will kill it, but it looks like any of us, and what do you do when the person you're depending on to save your life might be the person who's trying to take it? So The Thing is amazing. The effects by, I believe it was Rob Bottin, and maybe Stan Winston? Rob Bottin, I'm pretty sure, are horrifying. Like, they're all practical effects. It's not CGI, it's not computers, it's all stuff that actually existed in the room on the day. And it's horrifying. Some of it looks a little silly now that we've been, 30, almost 40 years hence from that film, but it's shocking. And it's mind-bending and mind-warping because you see things, physical things do things physical things shouldn't be able to do. And I kept thinking while we were watching this, man, I would have loved to have been in an audience opening weekend back in 82 to see how people reacted to this, because it was gore on a level that nobody had ever seen, and it was effects on a level that nobody had ever seen. And there had been gory movies since the 70s, but not like The Thing. And The Thing has spawned many imitations over the years, and remakes and sequels and prequels, and they've just announced that somebody is taking a previously unpublished version of that story and remaking The Thing again, and the excuse is, well, it's got content nobody's ever seen before. You're remaking The Thing. Interestingly enough, the Mahoning Drive-In Theater, where I spend my summer weekend nights in Laheyton, Pennsylvania, we are showing a double feature of The Thing from Another World, the 50s Thing, and the John Carpenter Thing. It's something we talked about for a long time as being kind of cool, being able to watch a film and its remake back to back, and that experience. So I at least will have another chance to see The Thing on the big screen. So yeah, The Thing, it's very intense. It's very suspenseful. Ennio Morricone's score with some embellishments by John Carpenter. And great cast, and it keeps you guessing up until the last frame of this film who's got that alien inside them and who doesn't, or who is the alien and who isn't. And I have to say, wow, I mean, I saw clips from that film when it first came out, and I was 8 years old, and there's a sequence where somebody goes to use a defibrillator on somebody's chest. And I don't even want to say it because it's so gross, but something really horrifying happens. And I think it was Stand By Lights, Camera, Action on Nickelodeon, that old show that Leonard Nimoy used to host, where they would show behind-the-scenes featurettes for movies. And people like me, kids who love movies, were like finding out how special effects worked and all that kind of stuff. And I'm pretty sure it was either that or HBO. Somewhere showed this scene that happens in the movie, and they showed just enough to horrify me. Like, it bent my mind how disgusting and horrifying this was. And I cannot imagine being an audience who was not ready for that, seeing that for the first time back in '82. We saw it on a 35mm film print last night. That was about 50%. It was 50%. The first half of the film, the reels had turned pinkish. It happens over time. The color fades in film prints if it's not printed on certain stock. And I guess half of the film was one kind of stock and half was the other, because it had that reddish, pinkish hue to it, which after a while you get used to and is fine. But at some point there was a splice, real change, and all of a sudden the color looked like it was supposed to. And you could hear like a gasp fall over the audience, like, ooh, I see blue again. Flesh tones look like flesh. Everybody doesn't look like they have a sunburn. Pitch black isn't really, wine colored. So I don't, that kind of stuff doesn't bother me that much, but it was a blast to see it again with an audience. People went nuts at the end of the movie, and it was a great day in the theater. And I often recommend to anybody, if you have a local theater or a theater within driving distance. This theater was 4 or 5 hours from where I'm sitting right now, 2.5 hours from where I spend my weekends, and it was worth the drive, because where else are you going to see those movies together like that on the big screen? In a distraction-free environment, in a classic old theater like the Colonial that is like stepping back in time. To me, seeing an old movie in an old theater, you can almost do the Christopher Reeve Somewhere in Time trick. Don't look at the penny. You can do the trick and feel like you're back in time. You're like, this is a film print that was shown when the movie was new. This theater existed looking just like this when the movie was new. And if I don't look at the change in my pocket, as far as I'm concerned, it's 1982, and I'm having a great time in the theater with my friends. So, that's all I have really to talk about this week. I have a film I'm hoping to watch this week called Zombie Child, which is an art house horror film that deals with international horror in a way. That is out in theaters now, a pretty limited release, but I got a screener for that, so I'm hoping to watch that and tell you about that next week. Birds of Prey, which is the new Harley Quinn female villainous Justice League kind of movie, comes out this Friday. That's all I know of that's in theaters. On video, we have Ford versus Ferrari, which is a surprise Oscar contender that I saw in the theater. And we also have Bloodstalkers, which I keep postponing, this movie that I shot the extras for from Garage House Pictures on Blu-ray that I've seen. I had it on VHS years ago, and this new Blu-ray is out, and I really am looking forward to watching this movie to see, first of all, to see the film for the first time in forever. I sort of watched it the night that I was shooting extras with the director, but I was more concerned on what I was pointing my camera at than what was going on the movie screen. And I'm looking forward to seeing it look good, because on VHS it did not look good. So I will have at least 2 or 3 on video, at least 1 in the theater, and probably more babbling like this about whatever else I decide to throw my eyeballs at over the weekend. So I'm going to say goodbye, but we teased you with it earlier, but we're going to do it again, because I love it so, and I think it does, in these trying times, bring everybody together a little bit more. I'm going to tell you, I'm Mark, I'm the Cinemaniac. I will see you at the movies, and please take it away, Boxing Chimps.